So I got an email today from a viewer saying that they had bought the Olympus 8mm Fisheye Pro Lens based on a video review that I did a couple of months ago, and that they're very happy with it. And in that video, I made a statement that I'm going to be using this lens primarily for my real estate photography from now on, and no longer use my Panasonic 7-14 because it had the built-in defishing ability in the camera, and also you can do it in workspace. So of course they also asked me, how is that going for me in my real estate photography? And I'm happy to say that yes, I'm using this a lot for my real estate, if not exclusively. In fact, I did a real estate job yesterday that I wanted to share with you and show you that I really do use this lens in my photography. So let's go ahead and get started. Basically, you can see yesterday I took 420 shots. I used the EM1 Mark II, and I used these two lenses, primarily 8mm fisheye, at these two apertures at ISO 200, and then these are the images. So let me start here. These 17mm images are just drive-by photography because the job was in DC, so I just took a few shots of some of the architecture around there, like this firehouse was really cool, and then some other shots, some kind of factory here. So none of these are shots that I used for my real estate job. Every shot I used the 8mm Fisheye Pro, as you can see here. And I shot them all at f4, ISO 200, so very, very simple. And then over here, the reason there's such a mix here, I shot everything in RAW, but these three formats here are what I actually delivered to the client. So out of 338, I delivered, looks like about 50 images to the client. And that seems like a low keeper rate, but the way I shoot real estate is I bracket every room and I take 6 shots. So I have 3 ambient shots and I have 3 flash shots. So if you divide this RAW file by 6, I get a little over 50 actual rooms that I took pictures of. So my keeper rate was pretty high yesterday. So I was having a good day. I was in and out of that place pretty quickly. So I was really happy about that. And then the images came out, just fine. So let me go through the workflow that I use, because in my video a couple of months ago, I had a workflow where I thought I was going to be using the in-camera defishing or use workspace. But unfortunately, those images come out as JPEGs, and there's just too many highlights and shadows in every picture in real estate to really work with JPEGs. I mean, I could if I had to, and I would make it work, but it's just a lot easier when you have the RAW. So here are my 3 bracketed shots for ambient, ±1, and then the same thing for the flash. And sometimes what I do is I just click these 3, then I right click, and I merge them as an HDR. Sometimes that'll do the trick. But in this case, I really don't need to. I think this shot right here, the ambient light looks really good. This room looks pretty well lit. So let's look at this one first. And really the only problem with this image, obviously, is the floor is blown out with the highlights here, and the window, the lamps, or the fluorescent lights up here, all blown out. So let me try and do some minor corrections. So I'm going to just crush the highlights. I'm going to bring the shadows up slightly. And that's the best I can do with this raw image, right? It helped a little, but this is not something I could deliver to a client. This is what lesser real estate photographers do. I see this all the time. But this is not something I could deliver. And then let me just do a quick white balance correction here. And that's good enough, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these back into Photoshop, and that's why I bracket flash and ambient, and then I do what's called, I guess they call it flambient. And if you really want an excellent tutorial on this kind of Lightroom Photoshop technique, you need to watch Rich Baum and Nathan Kuhl's real estate photography channels. All right, and then out of the 3 flash shots, I think this one looks good, because the lighting here overall looks pretty good. And as you can see, the highlights are not crushed, right? I still have some detail in the lamps, and detail in the window. And all I have to do is I'll just bring the highlights down and I'll bring the shadows up a little bit. And that looks good. Now the only problem with this shot now is though, it looks like it was taken with a flash, right? Again, this is not an image I would deliver to a client, especially with all this fisheye distortion. Let's, but like I said, let's go into Photoshop and do our flambient exposure. So I'm going to select the two images I just edited. Oh, this one's still a little bit too warm. Let me correct the white balance a little bit here. There. Okay, so I'll right click this, open as layers in Photoshop, and then I'm going to align these two layers. I'm going to do Edit, Align, Auto. All right, good. Wow, my tripod moved a lot just in those two shots, but that's okay. Now, underneath here, this is the flash shot, this is the ambient shot. So I'm going to blend these two, but I really don't want to use any of the colors from the ambient shot. In this shot, the colors are not too bad because most of the light is from the window anyway. But I'm going to convert this to luminosity only so that only the colors from the flash shot come through. But now the picture looks more natural, but we still have those highlight issues, right? So I'm going to add a mask. And then I have a black brush here. And I'm just going to bring the highlights back in. Now I have my brush at 3% because I just make too many mistakes sometimes. So whatever I do, I want it to be very subtle. I think Nathan and Rich, they like to use 8 or 9%. I've seen higher, but I'm fine with 3%. I think that's about as much as I'm going to get out of this. And then let me bring the highlights back in on these lamps. And then last, the floor, the highlights in the floor. I mean, I'll leave a little bit of shine here. If I was not in a hurry, I could have stayed there and got a better shot of the floor where there isn't any shine, but that's okay. That looks good. Let me get rid of that reflection there. There, that looks good. Now, let me fix some of the lighting in here as well. I need a bigger brush. So let me undo that and start over. And then let me bring some of the light back in here. And up here. There. And get rid of this shadow just a little bit. Just soften it up a bit. There. All right, I think that looks good. So let's bring this back into Lightroom. So I'm just going to close this and say yes. So we're almost there, and obviously I cannot deliver a fisheye image to a client, so I'm going to defish this. And the way I do it in Lightroom, I made a shortcut over here so it does it quickly for me, but I'll show you manually how I do it. I just go over here, I just click these two things, and then I pick a generic lens like Sigma. And then all I do is I try to find a similar lens to the 8mm Fisheye Pro. And sure enough, Sigma has an 8mm f3.5. And you can see that cleaned it right up very easily. So it's the same thing as clicking the defish button in Olympus Workspace or in Camera, but I'm working with a RAW file instead. And let's compare that to the one I actually delivered to the client. And actually the one on the right is a little bit darker, or too dark. I may have to update his folder with a newer image because I like the one I edited for you guys much better.